What are the chances of a global disruption in 2024? Two wars in, high interest rate regimes and global recession. If these factors worry you, you're not alone. Economist Intelligence Unit Risk Outlook 2024 evaluated some of the top events that could have severe impact on core economic and geopolitical forecast and found the above mentioned factors could weigh in on growth factors and growth prospects for the future. What are these factors? Let's find out. High interest rate regime, war, uncertainty, recession. What are these factors? What could dampen growth for 2024 for the world at large?
Right. So, Shweta, I think what the Economist Intelligence Unit EIU has done fairly well is that they've been able to drop a list of 10 risks that the world is staring at as it enters 2024. Now, these risks have been categorized as political risks, military risks, economic risks, as well as environmental risks. So, these are the four broad categories, and within each of these 10 risks, the Economist Intelligence Unit has also been able to assign a certain probability ranging from low to high and moderate in between, as well as the impact that it is likely to have on the world. So, I think let's run our viewers through some of these risks, and some of them are indeed really interesting and exciting. So, what you see, this is pretty much, we've taken it almost exactly from the Economist Intelligence Unit, and the ones that you see in blue, marked in dark blue, not this light blue, climate change, the ones marked in dark blue are the ones that are political in nature. The ones marked in yellow or orange are the ones which are economic in nature, and the ones marked in red are military in nature. So, let's take all of them one by one, should we? I think let's start with the political risks and talk about US administration's new foreign policy. Could this strain alliances as they exist in the world today? Now, remember, 2024 is a critical year when more than half the world goes into polls. We'll discuss the fallout of that also subsequently, but US being a critical sort of first mover when it comes to defining the world order as we see it, and hence you will see that any sort of change in policy by way of elections in US next year could weigh in very clearly on the rest of the world. Now, what happens? What is the scenario here? The scenario is that what if you had Joe Biden or the Democrats exit US? If that exit happens, a direct impact on India, which is right now a preferred, favored nation as opposed to China, that advantage moves. And if the Republicans come to power, China gets to sort of renegotiate and reset the trade order and the world order as we see it. The next one is, again, sticking to the political theme. We are talking about trust in political institutions undermined by AI. We spoke about elections. About 60% of the world, to be precise, is going to be voting in 2024. Now, what really happens? What happens when artificial intelligence, and we've seen the power of deep fake. In fact, all of pretty much last week, Shweta, we've discussed and we've seen the ugly side of deep fakes. Now, what if deep fake and AI prompted engineering is deployed to make people believe things that were never said? Speeches, images, videos surfacing out of nowhere or surfacing out of engines, man-made doctored videos and any sort of content. Could that redefine the way elections are going to be deciding the fate of political parties? If that happens, and if there is a growing distrust in political leadership, that becomes obviously a great point of reckoning with respect to AI. The third point, again sticking to the political theme, the third point is industrial action disrupting global productivity. What is meant by this? We are talking specifically about something that is playing out right now in the world. What is playing out? We've seen the auto strike in US on account of wages just about coming to an end. We've seen a Hollywood strike coming to an end in the US. And as those strikes are ending, we are seeing in Bangladesh there is strife again on wage hike. So industrial workers up in arms, trying to battle inflation, trying to continue reaping the rewards of cost of living through the employment that gets generated for them, and really talking to power and standing up against the powers that be, that their wages need to get hiked. And if their wages are not hiked, they are not able to beat inflation, it becomes a challenge, it becomes a problem. So this is again a major political risk that could unfold in 2024 and define how industries are going to continue reaping in profits or head into some sort of corrections. Let's move on to economic risks. Let's talk about the high interest rates that you spoke about earlier, Shweta. Now, high interest rates have been a problem all of this year. For all practical purposes, I think the general sentiment right now, the general belief, which is also getting echoed in the Economist Intelligence Unit report, is that perhaps the days of high interest cycle and further hikings have come to an end. There are unlikely to be any further tightening of monetary policy, at least in the US, even though we are seeing still some sort of tightening happening in other parts of the world. So if there is this high interest rate cycle by virtue of higher inflation, by virtue of military risks, which we will come to subsequently, then there could be further pressure on oil, further pressure on the dollar, further pressure on interest rates, and that could again increase borrowing cost for industries, and that becomes a large political risk. Now, this risk, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, is moderate in probability, but if it does happen, then it has a high impact on the rest of the world. So let's move on to the next economic risk that we are talking about, and this one is critical again: green subsidies. What is happening right now is that between the US and the European Union, on both ends of the Atlantic, there is a subsidy war which is on. What is the subsidy war? I think this clean energy transition is something that all developed countries in the world, and including fast developing countries like ours, like India, have agreed to, that there needs to be a very, very affirmative change when it comes to energy and our dependence on non-renewable fossil fuel based energy. Now, what happens if these two countries start subsidizing their own industries and start subsidizing their own component makers to really get into this green energy transition? Who tends to gain from all of this? The gain is going to accrue to China, and China, by virtue of in any case producing cheaper components, could prefer either US or Europe and really make this tussle between US and Europe in energy transition even more rife. Now, according to the Economist, this is a moderate probability, but again a high risk. Okay, now let's come to China. Now, what is China really going to do? And this is of concern to the entire subcontinent of India that we live in. China exceeding its control and entering into Taiwan becomes a big challenge. Now, it's a low probability risk, but if this really happens, it's a very high impact. What happens? China annexes Taiwan. When it enters Taiwan, Taiwan becomes, of course, is one of the leading electronics manufacturer in the world. And all the AI that we talk about, and US banning export of NVIDIA chips and other high powered GPUs into China is threatened automatically, simply because the semiconductors that power all these GPUs are made in Taiwan. And if China annexes Taiwan, then pretty much all the electronics boom that we are seeing, AI boom that we are seeing, the balance of advantage tilts completely in favor of China. Hopefully, low probability should continue to be a low to no probability, because if this were to happen, then we are really looking at a major long-term economic impact for the world. Let's move on. What's the next risk we are talking about? Let's move to the military risks in action. There is, of course, this ongoing war for the last 1.5 years plus in Ukraine and Russia. Now, what if this actually becomes a global war? Not a low probability, but a very, very low probability here. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going to further fuel global tensions, and the relationship between the Western countries and Russia could lead to some sort of increase in military risks. The Economist says that this is very low probability, but if this were to happen, it is very high impact, but thankfully a very, very low probability. Let's move on to the next risk we are talking about. We are talking about, okay, we've done China annexing Taiwan. This becomes now a military risk, as it was even a political risk. And we've spoken about this, so maybe we can move on to the next one, where we are again looking at, again, the Economist says that this is low probability, very high impact, but if Taiwan were to get annexed by China, then it obviously becomes a problem. Sticking to military risks, Israel-Hamas war. If that war extends to the rest of the Middle East, and if countries like Iran were to get more directly or indirectly involved, either through Hezbollah or through Lebanon or through any other route, and the fact that Iran has a support system coming in from China, coming in from Russia, this entire belt could eventually get engulfed in a war. It seems like very low probability, but if this were to happen, we are talking about non-energy transition, present day reality, that this region pretty much fulfilling energy demands for the rest of the world. If this war were to extend beyond the borders of Israel and Gaza and Hamas as we know it, and Palestine, then this could obviously become a problem. The last risk is the climate change, and climate change disrupting global supply chains. This again is a risk which is in the environment space. Now, extreme weather conditions in India itself, we've seen an El Nino like situation. We have seen delayed monsoons, and we've seen what that has done to food prices, food inflation in India. Now, the rest of the world has actually accused India of adding to global inflation, global food inflation. Why? Because India had to curtail its exports of rice, essential commodities, as well as wheat. So, if global climate change, which is sporadic right now, starts to develop into a pattern, then what we're really looking at overall in the world is high inflation. High inflation means higher interest rates, and higher interest rates means lower growth because the cost of borrowing, cost of capital increases. So these are the 10 risks to watch out for in 2024, ranging from very low risks to very low probability to high probability, and from very high impact to low impact.
One of the risks that stood out for me, very high probability, is the climate change risk. As you pointed out, could have a very medium to low impact, but there is a chance that that will happen, and when that happens, it's going to play up on the supply chains across the world.
Absolutely. So I think what we have seen, Shweta, this time around in India itself has been the El Nino-like situation. We've seen sporadic rains, we've seen a delayed monsoon, and we've seen what has happened to the crop cycle. From tomato prices to onion prices to rice production, which India had in abundance, but wanted to protect it and wanted to subsidize it to feed the domestic population rather than opening it up for exports. So global supply chains could get disrupted.
Absolutely.
If these sporadic rainfalls or drought-like situations become a pattern and attack the world in a synchronous rather than an asynchronous ad hoc manner.